All right, we'll go ahead and get this started. Welcome. My name is Kevin Meeker. I'm the Business Development Director here at ASK. Wanted to thank you all for joining me for a webinar on how Microsoft Teams, OneDrive, and SharePoint can work together. I want to go over a few housekeeping items, a few little things here before we get started. I want to apologize in advance. The City of Lansing is doing a fairly large construction project involving water mains in front of my house. So if there's banging or crashing in the background, I apologize in advance. There's very little I can do about that. This webinar is going to be recorded. We will be posting it to our COVID resource page after the fact. Should be up later on today or tomorrow sometime for sharing around for those folks who couldn't join us today. That will be there. We'll be taking questions via chat or follow-ups after the webinar. I've made sure to keep my calendar clear for the rest of the day. Certainly give myself or a call or an email, and I'd be happy to talk specifically about questions you may have about your deployment, how it affects you and your company. This webinar is going to focus specifically on the M365 or O365 stack of software. If you're running a SharePoint server on-premise, things will be a little bit different. One note is Microsoft is making some changes to their naming conventions. Office 365, that term is kind of going away. It's being replaced by Microsoft 365. We'll be doing a webinar here in a couple of weeks on those changes, the licensing changes, and how that's going to how that's shaking out with Microsoft. So certainly feel free to join me for that if you're interested in learning more on that transition. Microsoft certainly has done a remarkable job of making Teams, OneDrive, and SharePoint work together. The struggle is they haven't done, without going to them and consuming their documents and consuming their videos, there's not a very intuitive way of understanding how these three pieces of software intertwine. And that's what I really want to go over today is how they intertwine with one another, how they work together, and some best practices for each of the three. So first, we're just going to start in just a broad, quick overview of the Microsoft 365 software stack, and again, how some of them intertwine. We'll go through some things with OneDrive. We'll talk SharePoint in some detail, as well as Teams. Certainly Teams and SharePoint, they can do a lot. There is a lot of various features and functionality built within them. Most companies are only leveraging a small percentage of them. Unfortunately, that percentage tends to vary based on the company's need. So we'll go into some items, but I could go on for hours and hours and hours about Teams and even longer on SharePoint, and I'm not going to do that to you folks today. But there's certainly a lot that can be that can be done within SharePoint and Teams. Just to kind of give a brief summary, SharePoint is kind of the glue. It's the back end. It's the document repository. It kind of holds everything together. OneDrive and Teams actually live and stay on top of SharePoint. They're kind of your windows into your portions or your particular pieces of your company's SharePoint deployment. So with that, we'll just talk about the Microsoft 365 stack. They've really done a phenomenal job of, over the last few years, truly intertwining the traditional office productivity products, your Word, your Excel, your PowerPoint, with the collaboration tools such as Microsoft Teams and OneDrive, as well as with the operating system with Windows 10, and then also with mobility. Every one of the M365, O365 software package pieces of software has a mobile client. You can utilize every single one of them on any kind of Android or iOS mobile device. One of the things that this does open us up to is security. And certainly we have to be very cognizant of how we're accessing our Microsoft 365 deployment and from where we're accessing it. This is another big suggestion. Please enable two-factor or multi-factor authentication. Don't just let your password be the one thing that's keeping people from getting into your deployment, your Office 365 or Microsoft 365 deployment. Set up an authenticator app on your cell phone, something to make it more difficult for people to access it, because as everything's intertwined, the level of access somebody gets, if they can get in with just with your password, is, pardon me, just almost frightening. So please, if at all possible, enable that multi-factor authentication on your Microsoft 365 tenant. It's one of the best things you can possibly do to keep yourself secure, especially with your staff being scattered everywhere. So, what are OneDrive, Teams, and SharePoint? OneDrive, I consider that your personal file repository. It's a place for you to store all of your files so you can access them virtually anywhere you need to access them. If you're not on your device that you're familiar with or your own device, as long as you have an internet connection, anything you've saved in your OneDrive is available to you. Microsoft Teams. Microsoft Teams is that hub for teamwork, as it says. Right? It is a place for you to access shared files, shared information, information that's specific to your group or your functional division within your company. It's a way to collaborate and organize those. You can schedule meetings. It's a phenomenal tool for that cohesiveness and collaboration. And then SharePoint has traditionally been used mainly as the replacement for the S drive, or that shared drive that everybody had access to and dumped their files to. And while SharePoint certainly does fulfill that function, there is so much more that it can do. You can create different sites. You can create your own intranet with HR resources and pages for your staff to go to about what's going on within your company. There's so much that SharePoint can do. I feel like most people are only scratching the surface, but again, we're only going to kind of get into the traditional use of SharePoint, some of the ways that folks are using it as a file server replacement in this webinar. But there's certainly plenty of other things that can be done with SharePoint. It's almost daunting in the volume of things you can do with your SharePoint deployment. So diving into OneDrive. OneDrive is a secure document file storage repository for your particular files. If you would like to share files with coworkers or co-author documents with coworkers, you'll first need to have them in your OneDrive. OneDrive is a very light client, very easy to use. In fact, we, as a best practice, suggest that you just take your My Documents folder on your computer and map it to OneDrive. So anything that goes into My Documents is also synced to OneDrive, so you can access that from anywhere. And I would imagine that a lot of you have that currently set up, but if you don't, there is the little blue Microsoft OneDrive icon down in your taskbar. Click on that and the 3 ellipses, and you go to Settings. And here under Account, you can show and choose which folders are mapped within your computer to your OneDrive. So you have full and complete choice as to what gets backed up to your OneDrive. And as you can see here, you have a terabyte of storage available in the cloud. So you can hold a substantial amount of information in your OneDrive from which you can access from anywhere. Once this whole stay-at-home order gets lifted and you're visiting with folks out of town, if you need to do some work, need to access a file, first of all, you can pull it up on the OneDrive client on your mobile. Or if you need to, you can sit down at their computer and log into portal.office.com and access all of your documents through the OneDrive link there. So OneDrive, again, very, very simple, basic, easy to use piece of software that gives you that access to your files anywhere and ability to share those files with your colleagues for collaboration, co-authoring, things of that nature. So again, OneDrive's a great client. I highly recommend mapping that My Documents folder. It makes life a lot easier, especially with this, a lot of us having to just immediately pick up and go work from home. We didn't have to worry about copying files to machines and things like that. It's just all in OneDrive. SharePoint. Now, SharePoint is a framework. It's the net or the platform on which OneDrive and Teams both live. Your OneDrive is just a small little section of your company's SharePoint that is dedicated only to you. Also, for more of a team-based approach, anytime an Office 365 or Microsoft 365 group is created, a SharePoint site is created automatically on the back end for that group. Then any files or any files that are stored or any collaboration that goes on within SharePoint is shared with that group, which can be accessed through Microsoft Teams. So briefly take you to, first of all, portal.office.com. If you don't use this, please do. It's a great place to access all of your Office apps. You can see my OneDrive, the various folders that you saw for my settings. Here's a SharePoint site. So this is ASK's. Here's our various teams here, and each team gets its own site. Within each team, you have a lot of different options here. You have your home page where you can post news and other activities. You can have some information. Here's some of the webinars I've been working on, as well as a list to the file structure that we have set up for all of the things that we're working on in this particular team. So this was set up in the background as soon as we created the group marketing team, and all of these folders happen to match up rather nicely with the various channels here in Microsoft Teams. So you can see the integration between the two, in that SharePoint or Teams sits on top of SharePoint. So SharePoint is again, it's that platform, and there's so much that can be done with SharePoint. I'm not here to talk about all of the ins and outs and the various things, but you could completely build your own intranet with, amazing content, a lot of information about your company in SharePoint. But again, most of us are just using it for that file share. It's a great place to go access those shared files while you're working remotely that we're sitting on the S drive or we're sitting on one of the servers at the office. Certainly work with your IT department for the appropriate permissions and the appropriate access. You certainly can set various security and permission levels, so only certain people have access to certain SharePoint sites and the documents within those sites. Again, work with your IT staff on making sure that those permissions are established and they're appropriate. Especially during this time, those permissions may need to be adjusted a little bit. Folks may need access to things that they normally wouldn't. Or you may want to certainly make sure that those permissions are as tight as you can make them to ensure the security of your data with everybody accessing it from so many different places. So again, SharePoint it's a wonderful tool. It's a great platform for a number of different things. But again, most of the time we're just using it for file shares. That's been the traditional methodology with SharePoint. It's a place to house your files to be able to collaborate with your coworkers and colleagues that are in your same functional groups. Which leads us into Microsoft Teams. Microsoft Teams, once again, is a great collaboration piece. It, in my opinion, is the window into SharePoint. It's the way for you to access all of that stuff in SharePoint that you have without having to go to the site and go poke around for it. Based on what teams you're members of, what groups you're a part of within your organization, those files that are stored in SharePoint for those groups are then made available to you through your membership of the group in Microsoft Teams. So as you see, I'm members of various teams here. There's our All ASK team, our customer success team, business development team. There's marketing material, general teams. So all of these teams have backend SharePoint sites with various files and file repositories available. So you can access them either way. You don't have to access them through Teams, but again, I have my Teams client open all the time, and that's where I'm going to access all the things that I access on SharePoint. So as I've mentioned, each organization is different. Each organization has different needs, different requirements, different ways they collaborate. The big suggestion I have for all of you is to start looking at your teams, looking at how that collaboration is working. Look at how your Office 365 or Microsoft 365 deployment sits today, what groups are in existence today, are the files organized? Start planning that structure so that as things start to come back to normal, as these stay-at-home orders get lifted, we're actually able to get back into our offices, we can start really evaluating how we have things organized, how we have things set up, so that this is not the grandest experiment in work from home and everybody goes back to work, but we actually can have some flexibility and a little bit more freedom in being able to work from virtually anywhere and be very, very effective. I know that with us leveraging the Microsoft 365 suite at ASK, we really haven't missed a beat much. We were able to transition from home to home and be able to work almost as effectively as if we all showed up to the office. Now, there's certainly things that we miss. We miss the collaboration. We miss the cohesion there at the office, the culture. But at the same time, as far as servicing our customers and taking care of business, we're able to do that because of how we've invested in the Microsoft 365 suite and how we have our data organized. Now, don't get me wrong. We have found problems. We have found some issues. We've had to make some adjustments. And I'm sure that our deployment experts have a running list of things that they need to change based on their experiences during this crisis. So please, start looking at this. This is not something you have to tackle A, by yourself, or B, all at once. The primary thing that I would like to get folks thinking about is the fact that SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams all work together. They're all part of the same software stack. In fact, Teams and OneDrive sit on SharePoint. So they're almost in that sense, they're really the same thing. They can't work without each other. So trying to help you guys get into that mentality of thinking about your data differently and how it's organized is probably the key and most important point of this, is getting yourselves broken into your functional groups and then organizing your data appropriately within those functional groups so that people have access to what they need to access wherever they need to access it, so they can continue to function, be productive, and do their jobs, whether they're at your place of business 40 plus hours a week, or some people could literally be sitting on the beach and be just as productive as they are in their desk. Now, it takes a lot of focus and a lot of a mental fortitude to do that. But at the same time, this crisis has really started to show the value of the Microsoft 365 stack if it's organized properly, and how well you can continue to operate and function in your day-to-day by utilizing the collaboration tools that are presented and utilizing them in the manner in which Microsoft has intended. Now, again, they did a great job of making them work together, but they didn't do an overly good job of broadcasting how they intended them to work together. So with that all said, I'm going to talk about some resources available, because there's so much out there on these subjects that you can consume dozens and dozens of hours of information and not feel like you're any closer to what you needed to do. So first and foremost, I would work with your IT staff or ASK or a company like ASK to really talk about how you do business, how your company is structured and organized, what pain points are you experiencing, and then how can these three products, as well as others within the Microsoft 365 stack, solve some of those problems and make you more efficient. Microsoft's website has a tremendous amount of information. Now, it's difficult to weed through, but there's a lot of information. A good Google search will get you a lot of documents right out of the Microsoft site that may be able to answer some specific questions you have about SharePoint or Teams or OneDrive. Microsoft maintains YouTube channels on Teams and SharePoint. They actually have great videos out there. Some of them are rather lengthy. Some of them are pretty short, quick, to the point, but they're very, very good videos to watch. They're not overly complicated. They are not in Tekanese. They are, in English, that are very understandable. Another one that I found, SharePoint Maven. I'm not trying to plug them or anything. We have no relationship. I just found some very useful information as I was doing some research for this webinar, and I wanted to share. They have a great YouTube channel with some how-tos and some other information regarding how things intertwine. And as well as, if there are folks here who are on the call here and who don't currently use the M365 O365 stack, Microsoft still does have their E1 licensing promotion available, where they're offering 6 months of all of the online versions of their software as basically a free trial, a free 6-month trial. So by all means, take a look at that if you're thinking about making the leap. It's definitely worth signing up for and starting to poke around and see what's out there and see what's available to you. So with that, I'd like to thank you guys all for attending. I hope this has been at least informational and educational. I'm hoping I've at least given a couple of little tidbits here and there on some various things that and how various things on how OneDrive, Teams, and SharePoint can work together. Next week, we'll be diving even deeper into the Office 365, Microsoft 365 stack. We'll be going into detail on how to share and co-author documents and files within Microsoft 365. Little tidbit on that. Did you know you could actually schedule a meeting in a Word doc? It's one of those things that kind of blew me away, is I can actually schedule a meeting to where people will literally meet in a Word document to co-author. So we'll go through that. We're continuing to adapt and evolve our webinar series based on the demands, based on the interest level that we're getting from folks. So if there's a particular topic that you'd like to see covered, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to try to work that in. And I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention that week after next, we'll be talking about the Office 365 licensing changes, the various O365 versus M365 licensing, and how that's different and what that looks like for a company and some of the benefits of that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. I want to thank everybody for attending. I appreciate everybody taking the time. And again, I hope this was useful.